Patrick.
Hey, Michael J. What's poppin'?
What's poppin' is the first Mythic Championships is coming up this weekend.
Yeah, I mean, Friday morning, you know? So at the time of us posting this, mere hours away.
Yeah, so also in my hometown of Cleveland, Ohio, probably the greatest city in these United States.
Yeah, Cleveland rocks.
Yeah, so standard. There was what is it called? It's not a Grand Prix anymore. A Grand Prix in Memphis.
Who knows? Yeah, it's a Magic Fest. It's a Mother Magic Fest Grand Prix, yo.
Well, whatever it was a heck of a swerve on the standard format. Very different decks finishing in the top than we've seen in some recent weeks, including a return to the one true color.
Is this red?
Yeah.
Or blue? Red?
Blue did all right also. Continue to do all right.
When did you become just a red mage? You used to be such a green mage, and then you were just such a blue mage.
Well, I mean, in the 90s, I was just a mono black mage. I was always mono black, and then I was like blue and like. And I was combo for a while too, for a long stretch. But I don't know. I feel like I just came to religion late in my life, and that's how I feel playing red now. Just like, this is what I always should have been doing. You know, that first weekend that you and I met in November of 1996, you already knew. You had Ball Lightning and Lightning Bolt and no Zurin Orb at all in your deck, as far as I can recall.
No, hell no.
Zurin Orb, come on. And you just demolished the heck out of that Pro Tour. And I was there with my black creatures and drawing extra cards, paying life. I should have taken a note then.
Dude,
I might have had a very different destiny.
Orcish Artillery is so good against people with Pump Knights and Contagions. So the Rakdos deck that finished, Jody Keith's champion list, definitely primarily a red deck with just a hint of black for the Rixmati Reveler and the Eldest Reborn and Carnival Carnage.
Yeah.
Plus, the usual duress package in the sideboard. What do you think? What do you think of Big Rakdos, man? Big Rakdos.
So this was one of the pretty medium high performing decks from the previous format. Just kind of updated with some cards from the Rakdos Guild in the most recent set. I think this deck makes a lot more sense than the previous version. Right? I think like cards like Theater of Horrors just fit perfectly into this strategy.
Yeah. I mean, Theater of Horrors is definitely a lot better suited here. An aggressive but also bigger red deck.
Yeah, and like there's just subtle things that are great about this deck. Like I think Carnival Carnage is a really effective card. So like on one hand, you have Carnival, which can take out like a small creature, right? Like there are scads of 1 toughness creatures in this format that you want to snipe for a single mana, and then it can just subtly turn on Theater of Horrors or Rixmati Reveler, and it's just nice. It's just a nice little mana to action conversion ratio there. And then if your opponent is one of these awful people who doesn't have any creatures, you can Blightning them, and it's not the best Blightning, but it's the Blightning we have, and it's fine.
So I want to mention, remember, we actually spent a fair bit of time on Jody Keith's deck last week because Jody Keith was actually the person who top-8'd the Open with this almost the exact 75. The only changes he made are some changes that I think might really speak to you. First of all, he cut Drill Bit from his sideboard for an Angrath, the Flame Chained, just not getting enough mileage out of that discard spell. He swapped a Shock out for a Shivan Fire, and then in his main deck, he got rid of, instead of 2 Cinder Barons, he's now playing 1 Cinder Baron, 1 Rakdos Guildgate.
I love that. That is literally my favorite change in this deck.
And then finally, and I don't know how you'll feel about this one, but he cut the Miser's Banefire to put the 4th treasure map in his deck.
Well, I'm torn because I love a treasure map. I think you'd be hard-pressed to find a magician who loved Treasure Map more than I do in the current standard, but I also love Banefire. Yeah. I don't know. I'm torn. I feel like both of them are great against blue-white control-based decks, so it's very forgivable. I'd like to have one somewhere, because that map is going to dig you to that Banefire, and that Banefire is going to kill a mage.
Rakdos took the top slot. Not exactly a table flip compared to what all we talked about last week. So instead, what do you think of the updates to Mono Blue? Not really anything too crazy, right? So that's probably another area where it's just sort of people have sort of figured out the recipe a little bit, right?
Well, you want to start with Steve Rubin? Steve Rubin's a Pro Tour champion, right?
Definitely also playing a relatively stock list with perhaps the one exception of 1+3 Enticing Melody.
So Enticing Melody, very, very solid card. If you know what you're aiming at, and what you're aiming at is within the mana confines of what the mono blue aggro deck can do, that this card is good. It's obviously one of the most efficient ways to deal with Hydrate Crisis. It's also decent in the mirror. It's also good against red. I'm a big fan of Entrancing Melody, and I think it's kind of a bold move playing, being able to go up to 4. I like it. What do you think about the one Lookout's Dispersal? That's one that speaks to me.
It's fine. I don't know. I don't think it's actually that significant, the difference between some of these counterspells.
Yeah, there's only one kind of pirate in this deck. Some previous versions had some other pirates, but this one only has one class of pirate. So Lookout's Dispersal will often be a 3-mana spell in this deck.
Yeah, but 3-mana deal, counter unless they pay 4 has seen plenty of play, particularly out of Tomohiro Saito.
Yeah.
What do you think of the one I really wanted to get at though was the Sultai list? Like, Corey Burkhart finished second with Sultai, and Jara Godoy finished third with Sultai. What do you think of the latest takes on Sultai?
So just starting with Corey's deck, we see here it's weird to say it's eclectic for a deck with so many 4-ofs, right? Because there are quite a bit of 4-ofs here. He's got 4 Wild Growth Walker, 4 Jadelight Ranger, 4 Merfolk Branch Walker, 4 Llanowar Elves, 4 of all these guys that are, have been often together in the Golgari tradition. But he's got a bunch of 1 and 2s, including a single Ravenous Chupacabra alongside 2 copies of Hostage Taker at the 4, and then 1 copy of Carnage Tyrant in the main deck, along with 3 Vivian Reeds at the top, but then 3 Fine Finalities. So, the 3 Fine Finalities are kind of friends with the Carnage Tyrant. The 3 Vivian Reeds are kind of competing at the top with the Carnage Tyrant on power. But then he also has 2 Vraska's Contempts competing with the Hostage Taker and the Ravenous Chupacabras at the 4, kind of creature removal cards.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the Sultai deck. I think, and I like Corey's version better than some of the other ones. My plan is actually, I'm playing Sultai in the Pro Tour tomorrow, and my list is closer to Corey's than a lot of decks, although there's a couple key big differences. To begin with, what do you think of these 2 Kraul Harpooners in Corey's sideboard?
Well, thanks for teeing me up on that one, because I know the end game on this. Kraul Harpooner is awesome in this metagame. It's absolutely fantastic. So this is one of the best just straight routes to a free win that there is in the format right now. If you're on the play and the opponent plays a Healer's Hawk or one of these 1/1 flying creatures out of the mono blue deck, you can just murder them right there.
Yeah, I think Kraul Harpooner seems really dope. And first of all, it does get those free wins you spoke of, and then against Mono Blue in particular. Second of all, I think it has a surprisingly wide range of applications. It's not that it's good against Sultai, it's not. But it does kill Thief of Sanity some. And it's not that it's like insane against the white decks, but like sometimes they have like 1/1 flyers or 1/2 flyers, and besides, sometimes you got to kill a Lyra Dawnbringer. The thing I really like about it, besides the blue matchup, however, is how much it is a proactive card. And in fact, I think my plan is to go further than these people who sideboard 2. I want to actually play 3+1 and put 3 Kraul Harpooners in my main deck in place of 3 removal spells. Like compared to Corey's deck, I'd be moving those 2 cast downs to the sideboard, so I'd have 3 cast downs in the sideboard instead of 2+1. So swap 2 of the cast downs for 2 Kraul Harpooners. And then I actually only have 1 Vraska's Contempt, making room for a 3rd Kraul Harpooner. So cutting 3 removal spells in order to play 3 Kraul Harpooners main deck.
So So look, this is actually just a wonderful way to build the Sultai deck, I think, because like in the past we've largely seen Kraul Harpooner in Selesnya decks, right? But here you've got a deck that's got 8 plus ways to get things into the graveyard, because you've got Merfolk, Branchwalker, and Jadelight Ranger that are potentially binning creatures. So that's highly synergistic with the Kraul Harpooner. Obviously, just playing an attrition game or, opponent removal spells are synergistic with the Kraul Harpooner. And I think it's very realistic to be in a spot where the Harpooner can, reasonably, get his fists and or harpoon out against like a Drake, a 5/5 dragon, something more meaningful than a 1/1.
Totally. I mean, the Harpooner definitely puts in some work against flyers, and I think right now there are just everybody's got some flyers.
Do you think at the Mythic Championship level you're likely to have any kind of just bungles on the board because people they don't think about Kraul Harpooner that much, like just the reach, or that's just too miraculous?
I don't know. You're always focused on the the onboard trick equity or something, but I think that I don't know. There's definitely a metagame gamble going on, but it's not just the blue matchup. It's also the Esper matchup and the Nexus of Fate matchup. If you draw removal spells, particularly cast down, against Nexus of Fate or Esper, it can be the kiss of death game 1. And I think that even though a 2-cost 3/2 isn't like the greatest threat ever, it's a game piece.
Oh, I mean, against like Nexus of Fate, that's just like a watch wolf. Its toughness isn't that meaningful.
It's a Merfolk Branchwalker where you dumped the card, So, like,
I think clearly better than a cast down against Nexus of Fate.
Definitely. And in general, against Esper, it's a threat. It attacks.
I think it's also, like, comparable to a cast down in the mid game, maybe just better against decks like Mono Blue, right? Like, if you were to
I think it's better. I think it's much better than cast down against Mono Blue.
Like, you're often, I think, going to be in a situation where, like, you're happy because you traded a creature early or whatever, you explored a creature early, and you can send Kraul Harpooner aiming at a Djinn, right? That's fine.
Yeah, even there's all sorts of ways you can line that up. So I think, the use of 3 Kraul Harpooners is probably the boldest metagame move on my part, and maybe it'll come back to bite me because I do like cast down in the format. I don't know. I got a hunch that I'm taking a gamble that in main decking just very few reactive cards, and having the ones that I do have, the Vraska's Contempt and the Assassin's Trophy, being so flexible. The other difference in my spell suit, because I also have 4 of all these cards, and then 2 Hostage Taker and 1 Ravenous Chupacabra. I actually was initially going to have 3 Hostage Taker main deck, but I ended up cutting 1 for a Ravenous Chupacabra when I just laid out my sideboard plans, and eventually found that I just had 1 more slot where I really wanted to have a Ravenous Chupacabra against red decks, and against Izzet where I didn't really want a Hostage Taker. The other difference, though, between Corey's list and mine, at least with the spells in the main deck, instead of the Carnage Tyrant, and instead of the third Find Finality, I have 2 Thief of Sanity main deck. I notice Corey doesn't play any Thief of Sanity. I'm a big Thief of Sanity guy. I love Thief of Sanity. So for my list, plus instead of these 2 Midnight Reapers in his sideboard, I just have 2 more Thief of Sanity.
I mean,
so yeah.
Talk about a card that's going to mess up Nexus of Fate, right? Especially if you're on Llanowar Elves and you get that guy out on turn 2, bang bang.
Yeah, definitely. I think Thief of Sanity is just such a game winner against Esper and even more importantly, Nexus of Fate. And Nexus of Fate, it can be very challenging game 1. And Thief of Sanity is like the best card you have against them. I also just think Carnage Tyrant is just kind of slow and doesn't line up against anybody really in the format all that well. And then it's kind of a surprising one, the cutting a Find Finality. I mean, I do love Find Finality, but I was just finding I sideboarded out against so many people. I trimmed numbers of Find Finality against so many people, and I kind of just wanted to make a little bit of extra room so that by having that second Thief of Sanity in the main deck instead of having 3 in the board, it gives me 1 extra slot in the sideboard for a Vraska Relic Seeker is kind of a catch-all. You know, like whatever it is I wasn't thinking of, I bet Vraska Relic Seeker is going to be a good card against them. Yeah. Plus, I really like it. I really like it in the mirror.
I mean, sometimes it just kills people. So here's my take on Find Finality. In the previous format, when the high end to a lot of the Golgari decks, obviously the Golgari decks are the evolutionary predecessors to the Sultai midrange deck. Find Finality was often paired with Carnage Tyrant right at the top, right? Like I have Carnage Tyrant. Now we find Finality, everybody. My Carnage Tyrant lives, and presumably I'm going to end the game this way. But back then, the go wide deck, like the default go wide deck, was Selesnya. Like tons of 1/1 tokens was a thing that could happen pretty frequently on the battlefield. And the go wide decks now are like either white weenie potentially with blue or mono blue, right? And those decks are way less vulnerable to Find Finality than decks that just play a bunch of 1/1 tokens and have like no spells that like you can't like indestructible against Finality, right? That's not a thing that's useful, right? So I think like the card itself is way worse when you're playing fewer Carnage Tyrants, and it's way worse contextually because like it's just straight effect against 1/1s is way worse than it is against mono
3/3s.
Yeah, it's just
well, see, I don't even like
with counter spells, right?
I don't even like Find Finality against mono blue, and it's not like it's a little slow for facing red decks, and it's not even that good against Esper. So, like, it's really good in the mirror, and I do like it against white. But even then, it's not like the greatest thing ever. I just think it's a little bit slow,
It's not nearly as good against... Oh, certainly, it's... my whole point is it's not that good against mono blue, but in part they have counter spells, right? This is a 6 casting cost spell, and they have all kinds of...
Well, I'm using it as a 2-cost spell. I'm going to be using it as a 2-cost spell, personally.
I just meant the anti-go wide aspect of Find Finality.
Yeah, but that's not even why I'm here. I got it here for the draw 2. It's just another draw 2. Oh, yeah.
Well, as a draw 2, it's also far less efficacious if you're not playing
that many. What in the world is going on with your vocabulary, man?
It's far less effective if you're playing fewer Ravenous Chupacabras, right? Like, because the card that you really want in some of those matchups is your Terror Man.
Yeah, and I do have the Hostage Takers, but it's definitely, with less emphasis on Ravenous Chupacabra and Carnage Tyrant, Find Finality goes down a little bit. But I do have all these Kraul Harpooners, but it's not like I'm short on Vivian Reeds or anything either, And I still have 4 Crassus, of course. In the sideboard, I'm definitely in for 4 Duress. A very minor tweak, but I'm playing 1 Negate, 1 Disdainful Stroke instead of 2 Negates. And the reason is because I just, when laying out my sideboard plans, found I wanted 1 more card against Sultai, and I had space for 1 Disdainful Stroke instead of that Negate. Like, I'm not going to board in Negate against Sultai, but Disdainful Stroke is actually really dope because of the ability to counter Hostage Taker. And that, of course, in addition to other stuff, Chupacabra, Vivian Reed, Find Finality, Vraska's Content. There's a lot of stuff it kills. But it's Hostage Taker. Hostage Taker is the one that I really want to hit.
In a pinch, you Disdainful Stroke Hydrate Crisis?
Well, you can. It just kills the thing. It doesn't stop the cards.
I understand there are other things.
I don't think it's going to come to that all that often, particularly with just how much anti-flying I have. But like I do think that the disdainful stroke hostage taker interaction is worth the price of admission.
Yeah, I think I would tend to disdainful stroke hydrocrisis and grit my teeth at whatever else was happening.
As mentioned before, instead of these 2 harpooners he has in the sideboard, I have the 2 cast downs that he has in the main deck. I do have a hostage taker in my sideboard. Now, here's some important differences. I don't have Crushing Canopy. I have so many Kraul Harpooners, I was getting less mileage out of the anti-flying aspect of Crushing Canopy. So I'm actually playing Thrashing Brontodon. It gives me one more answer to stuff like Wilderness Reclamation, but importantly, it's a sideboard card against mono red. I wanted to have another card I could bring in that's just like a solid, a solid above average card for the mono red matchup.
That guy fights every single guy in their deck on the ground, with the exception of the Rekindling Phoenix, right? Like even Goblin Chainwhirler doesn't really get through him, like without help anyway.
Yeah, and plus sometimes he kills an Experimental Frenzy.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually really like that. I assume you side that in against Wilderness Reclamation decks, right?
Of course.
So you just play it on turn 2, potentially turn 3, and you've just got a clock in play, and then when they play Wilderness Reclamation, you're like, you've already done 6 or something. That's not bad. I'm
actually also boarding it against Esper. I think that just having an extra threat, you've got to take out these removal spells, a bunch of them, and it's not a bad body, and it can do stuff like kill a Search for Azcanta. It's not the greatest thing ever, and it would depend on the rest of their build, because depending on what all I think they're sideboarding, I may want to just have a little bit of extra removal, but
it's totally fine. They might have anti-creature enchantments, right? Like some kind of white removed from game stuff that it could potentially interact with. They have those kind of cards sometimes, or big enchantments. They might have anything along, or big artifacts. Like some people play crazy cards. They play I was going to say Arch of Vraska. They might play the Immortal Sun or something like that. Who knows?
Another difference. I've got a Vraska Relic Seeker, as we mentioned earlier, and 2 Thief of Sanity. Flushing out the rest. Now, I don't have these Midnight Reapers, but I also don't have Cry of the Carnarium. Once I'm playing this many Harpooners, I thought the Cry of the Carnarium dropped a little in value, and you could board it against red, but I wanted the Brontodon against red instead of the Cry of Carnarium anyway.
Yeah, so Cry of Carnarium exiles the creatures that it kills, so it actually is negative synergy with Kraul Harpooner, right?
Oh, yeah.
I think this card is pretty medium against red anyway. All right, it's a lot of their guys just get their money, and then maybe you get a 2-for-1 or whatever, but they don't really care about the longevity of their creatures usually, right? They care more about their ability to deal small packets of damage and kind of chip you down a little bit, I think.
Yeah, that's fair. And then, that's basically it. Something a little different on my mana with my lands. I am playing 25 as well, but I guess I just don't believe in 10 blue sources. And maybe the difference is that because I've got these 4 Thief of Sanities that I feel more pressure to have the blue early. But I actually play 12 blue sources instead of 10. The difference being I cut a Memorial to Folly for the 4th Watery Grave, and I cut a Forest for a Hinterland Harbor.
Does that impact your ability to cast first turn Llanowar Elves very often?
It impacts it, but how often is very often?
Not often enough that you wouldn't choose the Hinterland Harbor, I take it.
So it does affect the probability, but the question is by how much. And the amount that if you just have 12 sources, the chances of being able to play if you have 12 sources, the chances of playing a Llanowar Elf on turn 1 are it's still quite high. I mean, we're talking 83%, whereas that 13th source, if you add a 13th source to your deck, you're actually only increasing the chances to 86%. So that is something, but it's the difference between 83 versus 86. And to me, taking a 3% hit on having that Llanowar Elf on time is worth it to increase the chances of my Thief of Sanity being there for turn 3.
Or even turn 2, right? That's
well, not really. I mean, yes, it is, because like in theory, I could have an Overgrown Tomb on turn 1, and then the Hinterland Harbor on turn 2 opens up the Thief of Sanity. So yeah, technically, it does actually increase the turn 2 Thief of Sanity, but it's really mainly just wanting to be able to play Thief of Sanity by 3, you know. So yeah, 2 extra sources of blue for me.
Yeah, I like it. I think that all these choices that you've made, moving the Kraul Harpooners to the main deck, using Thrashing Brontodon rather than Crushing Canopy, splitting up the Negate and the Disdainful Stroke, adding Vraska as a catch-all, all these things seem like great choices for, I was going to say a Pro Tour, but the first Mythic Championship. Because these kind of tournaments are just different than when you grind it out week after week on the Star City Tour or on a Grand Prix, right? Like, might be some crazy innovation coming in this week. Who knows?
As for Jara Godoy's third place list, yeah, the single biggest difference between Nahu and Jara Godoy's list is that he has Incubation Druid in addition to Llanowar Elf. So he actually cuts 2 land for 2 Incubation Druids. The part that blows my mind is that he plays 2 forests and 2 swamps. Like he's only got 10 ways to play Llanowar Elf on turn 1. I thought I was, slumming it with only 12, but he's only got 10. And what's more, these 2 swamps, man, I don't know. I don't know how you get to wanting to play with 2 swamps when you also have Llanowar Elf and you have these 2 Hinterland Harbors and only 1 Drowned Catacomb. Why not have the 2 Hinterland Harbors be forests and the Drowned Catacomb be I guess in theory he's keeping his mana better for the 1 Thought Erasure in his sideboard, but like maybe if you had like a bunch of Thought Erasures, he doesn't even have the Thief of Sanity package. So I don't know. To me, I think I like the other mana base a little bit better, and I like Incubation Druid as a card a lot. But I think first of all, you can only play so many 2s. And I'm kind of jamming on this Kraul Harpooner plan, but I do like that he's got 3 Harpooners in his sideboard, and obviously he's got Brontodon as well. So unlike Corey, I'm with him on the Brontodon plan.
I dislike a lot of these changes that Godoy has. First of all, I think like the Incubation Druid thing that's a little dodgy to me, but I think more importantly, in terms of cutting 2s, he cut a Wild Growth Walker, and he doesn't have another one in the sideboard. Like, that's like a sacred cow for me. Like, if you're going this direction, I really feel like you want to maximize your Wild Growth Walker, because people think about Wild Growth Walker as this card that's insane against red. It's very good against red, don't get me wrong. Like, red decks hate seeing that more than almost anything else. But it's also a meaningful threat in a lot of other matchups. Like, there are decks that don't have white or black removal that have a hard time removing a Wild Growth Walker once it gets to like 5 or 6 toughness, which is not difficult to get to, and it's just like a huge threat. It just like beats them up.
Well, also the life gain matters against mono blue, but that's not even the matchup where you want it. But it puts in work where you actually can just offset their clock a little bit. Because sometimes you can't block their flyers, you know?
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's other matchups. Like, I know that Drake's is not popular anymore, but, like, Wild Growth Walker has very, very interesting position against Drake's. First of all, a 5 toughness Wild Growth Walker probably isn't going anywhere, right? So they have Lava Coil, but not a lot of ways to deal 5 or more damage. Like maybe Beacon Bolt, but there's probably like 1+1 copy like anywhere in their deck. And then just like you were saying about the life gain being meaningful, Drake's is the kind of deck that can like slam you twice and reduce you to 0, but is like a very hard time dealing 30 or 50 damage. And especially if you're pressuring them back the other way, and especially in a deck like this, it has like access to a lot of mana and Hydroid Crisis, so you've got like a big game coming back the other direction. Plus the ability to kill their stuff with Ravenous Chupacabra and Assassin's Trophy and Cast Down. Like I really dislike removing a Wildgrowth Walker here.
Sure. There is one last deck that I kind of wanted to touch on before we wrap it up, and that's the 4th place Shota Takawa Gruul mid-range deck that seems, at least to share some amount of DNA with the 1st place Rakdos deck. This is another big red deck with Siege Gang Commanders and Rekindling Phoenixes and Direfleet Daredevil and Goblin Chain Whirler. The big difference here is that instead of the Rixmati Reveler, you've got Growth Chamber Guardian. And then instead of Carnival Carnage, you've got Collision Colossus. What do you think of this one?
This deck, I think, this is the kind of deck I've looked at it the first time I saw it, and I just have to kind of meditate over this deck. I think that this deck is important. I think this deck is going to have a meaningful footprint in the format, and like there's so many things that are unexplored about this deck. I really do think it's not just like a variation on the big red deck. I think it probably has a meaningful identity of its own. Like those Zertog Goblins, that was our preview card. Like, is this card awesome? Right? Like, it's not just that it's like a novel threat on 2. Like, this is a stretch on the mana on 2, right? Like, if you look at the Rakdos version, they don't actually need their black on turn 2. This is something like, oh, this was important enough to me that I'm going to play a different way, like a fundamentally different way early in the game.
It doesn't cost them as much, because one of the things that Zerta Goblin does so nice for this deck is that alongside Goblin Chain Whirler and Siege Gang Commander, it gives you just enough goblins to consistently, reliably unclaim territory.
Yeah, that's important. But that is a wrinkle in this deck that hasn't been present in other big red decks. That's part of it, right? So, and then separately, like this Collision Colossus part it's pretty cool, right? So first of all, this is a highly efficient way to interact with cards that normally annihilate this archetype, right? Like, oftentimes, if you land a card, let's say a Lyra Dawnbringer, it doesn't go anywhere, and they just beat you with it, right? Like, it's very, very difficult to remove for these decks, and unless they're playing very specialized cards, right? People who play like Statue, they can kill it, right? But it's unless you have like a specialized card like Fight with Fire, you have to tag team 2 cards, and who knows what somebody who is playing that might also be bringing to bear. Other high toughness creatures that are synergistic with it. But Collision Colossus is a really good way to interact with that. But when you're playing against like taking turns or one of these control decks, you just have this other mode of just 2 mana deal 4. It's very Boros Charmish, right? And I think that's pretty cool. We also see Cindervines in the sideboard, which is I would love to see the 4th Cindervines. I think that card is just too good. The thing that's crazy to me, though, is 3 total Lava Coils, 2+1. That's not a cut I would be willing to make.
Yeah, I feel like I would play the 4th Lava Coil here. But I kind of wanted to jump back for just a second and touch a little bit more on the unclaimed territory and why it's so smart in this particular build. If you notice, the mana base is stretched for Gruul Spellbreaker, Growth Chamber Guardian, and Zerta Goblin. That's a lot of different green early plays that you need, right? Unclaimed territory giving you another untapped duel is super exciting, and what's more, Goblin Chain Whirler, you're getting every part of it here. It's not just that you have 11 goblins with Goblin Chain Whirler, Gruul Spellbreaker, Goblin Chain Whirler, Siege King Commander, and Zerta Goblin, and then obviously these Legion War Bosses in the sideboard, also goblins. Warrior is a great name here. If you name Warrior, you get Goblin Chain Whirler as well. You get your green for Growth Chamber Guardian, and you get your green for Gruul Spellbreaker. So, and what's more, the Kraul Harpooner in the sideboard is also a warrior. So depending on which 2-drops you draw, Goblin and Warrior give you access to all your green 2-drops. Whichever one you want to name, either Goblin or Warrior, you actually get a lot of them, and Unclaimed Territory just is really overperforming in this list.
Yeah, I think, Unclaimed Territory for Warrior on turn 2 does help you cast Growth Chamber Guardian, and then will help you cast Goblin Chain Whirler on turn 3. The only thing I don't like about it is if you're relying on the Unclaimed Territory for your green, for Warrior, that doesn't actually help you adapt later, right? So you're kind of like locked into colorless for that purpose.
That's true. That's a good point.
Growth Chamber Guardian is just awesome, though. I think this card is just still somehow way underrated.
Yeah, it also doesn't help cast the Cindervines, the Unclaimed Territory. Another strike against it, I guess. But yeah, I think I like the Rakdos build better than the Gruul build. That said, I still just don't believe in any of these red decks. Whether it's Esper, Mono Blue, Nexus of Fate, or Sultai, or White Aggro, I like any of those decks. I guess I just don't totally believe in the red decks.
Well, I like the ease of the Rakdos deck, right? So the Rakdos deck doesn't lean on its mana very hard, right? That's one of the things that's good about it. Like, it gets an incidental black sometime, and then it gets like a really outsized payoff for the black. The green version kind of really needs that green, and the green doesn't always work. But I think that the green is really, really compelling. Like, so in this deck, Kraul Harpooner does a lot of work, similar to what you're talking about in the Sultai deck.
Yep.
Cindervines. I don't think you're really going to be reliant on the green for the Collision Colossus over much. I guess maybe against the control decks or against taking turns, you really do need the green there. But I think it's.
I miss the lack of treasure maps, man.
Oh wow. I somehow didn't notice that. Yeah, do you think that like Zerta... Actually, I like Zerta Goblin more than Gruul Spellbreaker. That's probably not a controversial thing to think.
Yeah. Well, all right, man. Wish me luck tomorrow. I got a 3:30. Got to go to the airport at 3:30 in the morning, so I am out. But Sultai it is for me, and maybe somebody broke it with Wilderness Reclamation, or maybe they broke it the exact same way that it's been broken. Either way, I'm looking forward to some good games, and I'm also looking forward to the games where I'm hitting people with Thief of Sanity.
Oh, well, I can't wait to hear about it. I think people deserve to be hit by Thief of Sanity, and they deserve to have their own tools used against them.
All right, man. See you next week.
Bye-bye.
Life didn't work so great. Tried to play Dredge, it's a jailer hate. Ghostly prison waiting for my untapped phase. Your core trapped in amber stasis days. Lost a lot of friends, got left behind. Had to find a way not to lose my mind. Trapped in a vault with nothing but time. Parents and my friends were the key to find. Magic gave me purpose and drive. The game, the love, it kept me alive. Visions of